Emily Morgan sat alone in the living room, absently stirring her lukewarm cup of tea as the evening light faded into the walls of their suburban home. The TV was on, tuned to a rerun of some crime drama she had seen at least 3 times, but her mind wasn't on the screen. It was on her husband, Ryan. He was late again. No call, no text, just the same silence that had started to stretch further into their marriage over the past few months. She glanced at her phone for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Nothing. The clock on the wall read 8:37 p.m. Dinner had gone cold, untouched on the dining table. Emily stood up, walked to the kitchen, and began reheating the food in the microwave even though she wasn't hungry. She just needed something to do with her hands. The routine was becoming painfully familiar. Lately, Ryan always had an excuse. Work ran late. Traffic was horrible. A friend needed help moving. He always said the right thing in the right tone, but something about his explanations rang hollow, too rehearsed, too convenient. They'd been married for 7 years. In that time, they'd been through job losses, house hunting, her mother's cancer diagnosis, and 2 miscarriages. Through all of it, Ryan had been her rock, gentle, patient, loyal. But now, she wasn't sure she recognized the man who walked through the front door each night, looking like a ghost of himself, worn out and emotionally vacant. Emily tried to remember when she first started feeling the shift. Maybe it was 3 months ago when Ryan stopped joining her for morning coffee, or when he started sleeping on the far edge of the bed. Or perhaps it was when he canceled their anniversary dinner with only a day's notice, claiming a last-minute project that he had to finish. She'd spent the evening alone, sipping champagne she bought herself, staring at her phone. Then there was the phone itself. He'd never been one to guard it, but lately it was always face down. Once, she noticed a new fingerprint lock screen, one he hadn't told her about. When she asked casually about it, he mumbled something about security updates at work and quickly changed the subject. That was when the idea began to germinate. Not a full-blown suspicion yet, but a dull ache in her chest that something wasn't right. Adding fuel to her anxiety was the quiet financial tension creeping into their lives. Emily had always managed their budget. She noticed subtle changes, a delay in a mortgage payment by a few days, a missed credit card deadline, a higher-than-usual utility bill that went unpaid until she caught it. When she asked Ryan about it, he claimed everything was fine, that he was just trying a new budgeting method to make things more efficient. But Emily had a good head for numbers, and things didn't add up. And then there was her mother, Diane. Emily had taken over most of her care coordination after the breast cancer diagnosis last year. At first, it seemed manageable. Radiation, then a lumpectomy, then follow-ups. Diane always assured her daughter that the insurance was solid. Everything's under control, she'd say with that same stoic smile she'd worn since Emily was a child. But lately, Diane had started canceling appointments. When Emily asked why, her mother simply said, "Oh, I just needed a break." Between Ryan's increasingly distant behavior, unexplained absences, and the strange financial gaps, Emily's mind began to wander into dangerous territory. It wasn't like her to assume the worst. She was rational, thoughtful, someone who believed in communication and second chances. But something inside her, something raw and buried beneath years of compromise and hope, whispered that maybe, just maybe, Ryan had found someone else. The possibility hurt more than she cared to admit. Ryan had been her first serious relationship after college. The man who stood beside her at her father's funeral, who held her through 2 devastating miscarriages, and who danced with her in their empty kitchen the day they finally paid off her student loans. She couldn't picture him as a cheater. But then again, she couldn't picture herself becoming this paranoid either. And yet here she was, reheating food no one was going to eat and Googling local private investigators on her phone. She didn't make the decision that night, but the idea refused to leave her alone. It clung to her in the shower, whispered in her ear during work meetings, and followed her into sleepless nights. When Ryan began staying out past midnight twice a week, claiming a new overtime project that he couldn't explain in detail due to company policy, her resolve finally broke. A week later, she sat across from Claire Jennings, a licensed PI with 15 years of experience and an understated confidence that made Emily both nervous and hopeful. "I need to know if he's seeing someone," Emily said, clutching her handbag like it was a flotation device. "I don't want to believe it, but I need the truth." Claire nodded, jotting notes with the kind of calm that only came with seeing every version of heartbreak. "Do you have a recent photo? A schedule?" Emily slid her phone across the desk and handed over a printout of Ryan's typical work week. What he told her anyway. He works as an office manager at a logistics company. 9 to 5, supposedly. But he's been disappearing nights and weekends. His phone is always off when I try to reach him. I just want to know where he goes. Claire made no promises, only that she would be discreet and thorough. The service wouldn't come cheap, but Emily didn't care. She needed answers, even if it meant finding out the one thing she'd spent her life praying would never happen to her. That night, Ryan came home at 10:42 p.m. Emily was already in bed, eyes closed, pretending to be asleep. She felt him sit on the edge of the mattress, heard the sound of his socks hitting the floor, then the quiet sigh he always let out when he thought she wasn't listening. His weight shifted beside her, the bed creaked, and for a moment, she thought he might say something. But he didn't. The silence between them was now a living thing. And Emily, wide awake, eyes burning in the darkness, had just given it a name: doubt. The first morning after hiring Claire Jennings, Emily woke with a strange sense of anticipation, her chest tight with a cocktail of dread and relief. The decision had been made. No more second-guessing. Now, she just had to wait. But waiting turned out to be harder than she had imagined. The hours passed slowly, and each moment Ryan was out of sight, her mind spiraled into possibilities. Was he with someone now? Was she younger? Prettier? Did he buy her flowers like he used to for Emily? Claire had been professional, methodical, and somewhat cold during their meeting. Emily hadn't expected warmth, but still, the clinical tone in which the investigator had said, "You'll hear from me in 3 to 5 days with a preliminary report," felt like being handed a sentence instead of help. Emily wanted everything immediately. She wanted to know where Ryan was at every hour. She wanted someone to tell her she wasn't going insane. But Claire had warned her, this isn't a movie. Surveillance takes time. People have routines, and secrets don't always reveal themselves on schedule. Still, Emily checked her phone obsessively every hour, hoping for a text or call from Claire, even though she knew none was coming yet. She tried to keep busy. She visited her mother, who looked unusually pale and was coughing more than usual. Emily offered to reschedule her own workday to accompany her to a follow-up appointment, but Diane gently refused. "You have your job, Em. I'll be fine. Dr. Carlson already told me it's just a side effect. Nothing alarming." Emily noticed her mother's voice was thinner than usual, and the skin around her eyes looked sunken. Still, she didn't push too hard. Diane had always been proud, always stoic, and she didn't like Emily hovering too much. Instead, Emily kissed her mother's forehead and promised to call that night. When Ryan got home that evening, exactly at 9:10 p.m., still dressed in his work clothes, but smelling faintly of cleaning chemicals, Emily watched him quietly from across the kitchen. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there months ago. His shoulders sagged. He moved like a man twice his age. And yet, even in that state, he kissed her on the cheek and asked how her day had gone. The lie stung deeper because it was wrapped in kindness. Emily responded as if everything were normal. She smiled. She asked about his work. He answered in vague sentences, using the same script she'd heard all month. It was fine. Just a long day. Same stuff, different mess. Then he asked if there was anything to eat, and she warmed up leftovers for him, the silence thickening between the clinks of cutlery and the hum of the microwave. 3 days later, Emily finally received a message from Claire. Got something. Need to meet. Discreet location recommended. Can do Thursday at 6 p.m.? Emily's fingers trembled as she typed back, yes. Name a place. They met at a quiet coffee shop 2 towns over, tucked behind a dry cleaner and a rundown flower shop. Claire arrived on time, laptop in tow, and slid into the booth opposite Emily like she had done this 1,000 times before. She wasted no time. I followed your husband for 4 consecutive days. Here's what I found. She turned the laptop around and pressed play on a series of timestamp videos and stills. In the first one, Ryan exited what looked like a high school's back entrance at dusk, carrying a large trash bag and wearing a janitor's uniform. He loaded it into a dumpster and walked back inside. The next video showed him exiting the school close to midnight, getting into an old, unfamiliar car, certainly not the one he usually drove, and heading toward the city. Emily stared in silence. That's not. He's never mentioned any of this. Claire nodded. He works at Fairview High. Night janitor shift. He signs in under his middle name, Thomas, likely to avoid any digital traceback to you. After that, he drives 25 minutes to a 24-hour grocery store and works until 5 a.m. stocking shelves. Emily was stunned. So, he's not cheating? Claire shook her head. Not even close. He barely talks to anyone. I've observed him on all shifts. No one suspicious. No strange interactions. I also tracked financial records and found a secondary bank account. Not under his name, under a trust, but it's linked to your mother. Emily blinked, confusion washing over her. My mother? Claire tapped a few keys and showed a PDF of wire transfers. All from Ryan's primary account and this second job's paycheck direct deposits to the trust account, labeled for medical expenses. Each transaction matched treatment dates on Diane's calendar. He's funneling most of what he earns into that account. I can't get hospital records, but if I had to guess, he's paying for treatment. Emily sat back, a wave of nausea hitting her all at once. But she said insurance was covering everything. Claire gave her a sympathetic look. Sometimes people lie to protect each other, or themselves. The drive home was a blur. Emily kept seeing images from the video in her mind. Ryan, in those worn-down overalls, mopping a school hallway. Ryan bent over pallets of groceries, lifting boxes twice his size. Ryan, exhausted, slumped in the driver's seat of a car she had never seen before. It wasn't infidelity that had created the distance. It was sacrifice. She arrived home before Ryan that evening. For once, she didn't pretend everything was fine. She sat on the couch in silence, waiting for him with a heart pounding for entirely different reasons now. When the front door finally creaked open at 9:15 p.m., she didn't greet him with suspicion or passive-aggressive cheer. Instead, she stood up, walked toward him slowly, and asked softly, "Are you tired?" Ryan looked caught off guard. "Yeah, I guess I am. It's been. Where do you go after work, Ryan?" He froze for a second, just long enough to confirm her suspicions that he was hiding something. But then she saw something else in his face. Fear, not of being caught, but of being exposed in a way he hadn't planned for. He began, but she stopped him with a raised hand. "I'm not angry. I'm just... I know you've been working other jobs. I know about the bank account. I know it's for my mom." Ryan closed his eyes, sagging against the wall as if a weight had been physically removed from his shoulders. He didn't speak, but the guilt and exhaustion etched into every line of his face were louder than any apology. "I thought you were cheating," Emily whispered. He finally opened his eyes. "I thought you'd leave me if you knew how bad things really were. I just wanted to help without making it harder for you." She didn't say anything else that night. She simply stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding him like she hadn't in months. The man she had doubted wasn't hiding a betrayal. He was carrying a burden no one had asked him to. And, somehow, that hurt even more. Ryan stood in the living room like a man who had just been unmasked, not by scandal, but by love. He looked down at the floor, his hands still clutching the messenger bag he carried to work every day, but which Emily now understood wasn't just for office files and notebooks. It probably held janitor gloves, a change of clothes, maybe a protein bar or two to survive a night shift. Emily watched him silently, her heart aching in ways she hadn't anticipated. She didn't know whether to speak first or let him unravel in his own time. Eventually, he placed the bag down slowly and walked over to the couch, sitting on the edge like someone about to confess to a crime. Emily followed, sitting beside him, their shoulders close but not quite touching. The tension was different now, not made of resentment, but of something more delicate and painful, revelation. He took a breath and finally began. "When your mom told us the insurance would cover everything, I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I kept asking myself, how can she afford private specialists, extra imaging, medications that cost thousands a month? She'd never take charity, and you were already doing so much. I started checking into the bills behind her back. She didn't know, but I found out she was using credit cards and emergency savings just to get by. That's when I started looking for ways to help. Emily listened, trying to reconcile this version of her husband with the one she had grown suspicious of. The man sitting next to her wasn't calculating or deceitful. He was worn down, trying to protect everyone except himself. She hadn't even noticed. I took the janitor job first. Nights after my regular shift. The school offered decent pay and benefits. Then that wasn't enough, so I picked up some grocery shifts in the early mornings. Weekends, I've been doing odd jobs, moving help, warehouse shifts, whatever I could find. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to see that look in your eyes. The one you're wearing now. Emily blinked away the tears that had begun to pool. You thought I'd be disappointed in you? He nodded. You've always seen me as someone strong, stable, capable. I didn't want to turn into the husband who couldn't provide unless he worked 3 jobs. I didn't want to make you feel responsible for what was happening to your mom either. So I tried to carry it all on my own. Maybe that was stupid. Maybe it was pride. But it never once felt wrong. She looked down at her hands, ashamed of the thoughts she had harbored over the last few weeks. I thought you were with someone else, she whispered. I thought I'd lost you. His head dropped into his hands. I know. I saw it in your face every night when I came home. You looked at me like a stranger, and I felt like one too. But I didn't know how to fix it without blowing the whole thing apart. They sat in silence for a while, just breathing the same air, letting the weight of everything unsaid slowly settle between them. Eventually, Emily reached for his hand. He flinched at first, but then he held on tightly, as if afraid she might let go again. Ryan, she said softly, you didn't fail me. You didn't fail anyone. But you can't keep doing this alone. He finally turned to look at her. She's your mother. I thought it was my job to take care of her when you couldn't. That's the thing, she said, voice cracking. You were trying to protect me from pain, but watching you fade away from me hurt more than anything cancer ever could. They held each other for a long time, no longer needing to fill the space with explanations. When they finally pulled apart, Emily wiped her eyes and stood. We need to talk to her. About everything. No more secrets. The following day, they drove together to Diane's house. It was a modest 2-bedroom home, filled with the scent of lavender and the creaking comfort of old furniture. Diane was sitting on the porch, a blanket over her knees, reading a tattered book. She looked up and smiled when she saw them, but the smile faltered slightly when she saw the look on their faces. What's going on? She asked, pushing herself up with some effort. Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she took her mother's hand and guided her inside, Ryan trailing behind. Once seated, Emily dove in. Mom, we know you've been paying for things out of pocket. We know the insurance isn't enough. Ryan found out, and he's been trying to cover it behind our backs. Diane went stiff, the color draining from her face. I didn't want either of you worrying, especially you, Emily. You've already been through so much. I should have been worrying, Emily replied, her voice trembling. I should have been helping. We're a family, Mom, and families don't hide these things. Diane looked to Ryan, her eyes full of a sadness deeper than words. You've been doing all this? Why? Ryan's voice was calm but tired. Because I love her, and I love you, and I couldn't watch either of you suffer if there was something I could do. Diane shook her head, clearly overwhelmed. I didn't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, Emily said firmly. But we can't go on like this. Ryan's killing himself working these jobs. I've been drowning in suspicion, and you've been fighting this illness alone. No more. We face this together now. It took some convincing, but eventually Diane agreed to let Emily start managing her medical finances directly. They worked out a plan. Emily would take over coordinating with the hospital. Diane would stop hiding unpaid bills, and Ryan, reluctantly, would begin phasing out the night job. Emily even offered to sell some of her stock options from work to get ahead of the remaining debt, a gesture that shocked her mother but seemed to lift a great weight from Ryan's shoulders. That night, as they sat on the couch watching the news, Ryan leaned over and kissed Emily's temple. You were right, he said quietly. About what? That trying to protect someone by pushing them away isn't noble. It's just lonely. Emily smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Well, now we know better. And for the first time in months, the silence between them felt warm. 3 weeks had passed since Emily and Ryan sat down with Diane and laid bare the truth that had been suffocating their household from the inside. In that time, life had begun to shift, subtly at first, like sunlight creeping through curtains in the early morning, and then with more assurance, as if the act of confronting their pain had finally made room for healing. Ryan cut down his night shifts almost immediately, a transition Emily insisted upon. He still worked long days. He was never the kind of man to sit still, but now his evenings belonged to her again. Sometimes they cooked together, sometimes they just sat with wine and watched old movies they used to love. There was a gentleness in their routine now, one that didn't exist before. It wasn't a return to the past. It was something new, quieter, more deliberate, and marked by a mutual understanding that had been forged through the fire of fear, secrecy, and sacrifice. Diane had been hesitant at first about allowing her daughter to take control of her medical paperwork, but as the weeks went on and Emily demonstrated her ability to organize, negotiate with billing departments, and find support services they hadn't considered before, Diane's resistance softened. There were still moments when she tried to shoulder the weight alone. Old habits die hard, but Emily no longer let those moments pass unchallenged. "We do this together now," she'd remind her mother. And she meant it. One quiet Thursday afternoon, Emily sat in the living room, surrounded by bills and medical receipts. Diane had gone for a nap after her treatment that morning, and Ryan was upstairs taking a long shower. Emily methodically sorted through the papers, logging everything into a spreadsheet she created. She paused at one receipt in particular, a medication refill that cost nearly $1,000. Her eyes lingered on the amount, and her heart tightened. She reached for her phone and sent an email to a cancer support nonprofit she had found online earlier in the week. There had to be some assistance available. She wouldn't let Ryan carry this on his back again, not when they had come so far. Later that evening, as Emily and Ryan sat across from each other at the dinner table, their hands touched in a moment that felt spontaneous but also long overdue. The candles flickered softly between them, and there was something almost sacred in the silence they shared. "I've been thinking," Emily said, her voice low and careful. "When Mom gets better, and I believe she will, I want us to take a trip, just the two of us. Anywhere. Doesn't have to be fancy." Ryan raised an eyebrow, a small smile forming on his tired face. "You planning a getaway already? We're just learning how to breathe again." "Exactly," she said, squeezing his fingers. "That's why. We've spent so long surviving. I want us to remember what it's like to live." He nodded, his smile deepening. "I'd like that." But there were still harder days, too. Nights when Diane's nausea returned with vengeance. Afternoons when hospital test results brought anxiety rather than relief. Emily and Ryan supported each other through all of it, never allowing the other to fall too deep into despair. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments, fatigue, and moments of helplessness. But there was also partnership, the kind built not just from love, but from weathering storms together. One day, while visiting the hospital with her mother, Emily struck up a conversation with a hospital social worker, a woman named Teresa, who was overseeing support resources for cancer patients. Teresa listened patiently as Emily detailed their situation, the hidden jobs, the private investigator, the emotional toll. The social worker nodded with a kind of empathy that didn't need embellishment. She had heard hundreds of similar stories, but each one was its own world of heartbreak and resilience. "You'd be amazed," Teresa said quietly, "how often people go to extreme lengths to protect their loved ones without saying a word. It's human, but it's also dangerous. We need each other more than we realize." Emily left the meeting with brochures and application forms for financial aid, therapy referrals, and caregiver support groups. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was holding 1,000 plates in the air. There were options. There were people who could help. Later that night, she shared the news with Ryan. "You don't have to be a hero all the time," she told him, her voice steady. "There are people trained to do this. Let's use them." He looked at the papers in her hands, then back at her. You really think we're getting through this? I don't think, she said. I know. On Diane's next visit, her oncologist reported a positive change. The tumor was shrinking, the medication was working, and the outlook was cautiously optimistic. Diane, still frail and far from recovery, wept openly in the exam room. Emily held her mother close, whispering that they'd get through whatever came next. Ryan stood quietly by the door, hands in his pockets, watching the two women he loved more than anything in the world. Back at home that night, Ryan and Emily finally talked about the future in a way they hadn't for a long time. They spoke of dreams, not the fantastical kind, but the real ones. Having a child, remodeling the kitchen, maybe even starting a small business Emily had once put on hold. It felt almost surreal to speak of normal life again, but it was also grounding. They were building something on new terms with stronger foundations. Weeks turned into months. Diane continued her treatments, and while not every day brought good news, the hope in their home grew stronger with time. Emily returned to work with a clearer mind, while Ryan cut his schedule back to a single job. They went to counseling together, sometimes laughed in therapy, sometimes cried, but every session helped. Every conversation mattered. One evening in early spring, Emily stood on the back porch, the cool breeze brushing against her skin, a cup of tea in her hands. Ryan joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. You know, he said, resting his chin on her shoulder, there was a time I thought you'd leave me if you knew the truth. She turned her head, meeting his eyes. And there was a time I thought you were betraying me. We were both wrong, but we found our way back. Yes, she whispered, because we chose to. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in soft hues of gold and lavender. The silence that surrounded them now was no longer the silence of doubt or guilt. It was peace. Earned peace. That night, Ryan reached into a drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. Emily's eyes widened as he placed it in front of her. What's this? She asked, heart skipping. Open it. Inside was a simple silver ring. Not extravagant, not flashy. Engraved inside were the words, still yours. Always. It's not a second proposal, he said. It's a reminder that I never left, even when it felt like I did. Emily pressed the ring to her lips, then slid it onto her finger next to her wedding band. I know, she whispered, and I'll never forget. They didn't need a dramatic ending. Life wasn't a movie. There were no orchestral swells, no freeze frames. Just two people, scarred but still standing, choosing each other again and again and again. And that, Emily realized, was the most extraordinary kind of love there was.